All right, Alexander. In the UK, it has been discovered by Sunak that there is a 50 billion pound hole in the Treasury. Is that correct? 50 billion, and
Absolutely.
now he has to
Yeah,
plug it up.
yeah, absolutely. Yes, plug it up.
How's he going to plug it up? I heard one of the things he's going to do. I heard one of the things he's going to do because I was talking about uh, in one of my morning videos. I was talking about Ukraine, and I heard that one of the things that's going to get the axe is going to be the 350 pound payout to homes in order to host Ukraine refugees. So he's going to axe that, but he's going to he's going to cut a lot more other programs and expenses as well. Correct?
Absolutely. He's going to raise taxes. I mean, bear in mind, we have the highest level of taxes in Britain since the 1940s or 1950s. But he's going to raise taxes and he's going to cut spending. He's got no choice. I mean, there are people who criticize him for doing this, but the realities are that the only reason he stabilized the situation in the markets is because he's talked about raising taxes and cutting spending. And he's going to cut a lot of welfare and social spending, undoubtedly. But of course, other things that he's now apparently talking about doing is he's going to cut defense spending and he's also going to cut aid to Ukraine. And this is not because he wants to or because the British political class want him to. It's because it's the only way to make the numbers add up.
A part of the money to Ukraine or all the money to Ukraine? And
I
how
don't
much
know.
money was being sent by the
Well,
UK to
this
Ukraine? Do
is
you know?
a,
Do you have a
a very good question. I mean, certainly billions, not comparable to what the EU and the US provides, but a lot of money. I mean, several billions this year in both military and economic aid, and apparently that's going to be reduced. I don't think it's going to be reduced entirely, but it's going to be cut. And any cut in help to Ukraine is, of course, going to have big psychological effect. It's going to tell people that Britain is starting to walk away from Ukraine. It's not what the political class wants, and I should say that over the last couple of days, Sunak criticism of Sunak has been growing. I mean, he had a very you know a huge surge of support when he first became prime minister because basically he wasn't Liz Truss. But you can start to get a sense in Britain of enormous unease about the way things are going forward with Sunak, that he's going to have to increase taxes, cut spending, cut support for Ukraine, cut defence spending, carry out cuts in overseas aid, which, remember, overseas aid isn't just charity, it's the way that Britain buys influence in many parts of the world. So there's a sense that Britain is retreating, and British newspapers are now filled with articles about Britain being in a sense of spiraling decline.
They bet it all on Ukraine. They
They
bet
bet
it
it on
all
you.
on Ukraine, and
Yeah.
this is the outcome.
Yeah.
Uh, what other things is he going to cut? Do you have any indication what other expenses he's going to cut? And when you mean a tax increase, what are we looking at? Because I read an article. I think it was the Bank of England said that the UK is in for the longest recession, I believe, in history, or something along those lines. I forgot the title of this article, but something very grim with regards to the long term outlook for the UK, not short term, long term.
Yes. So let's talk about what he's going to cut. I mean, there's all the usual things. He's going to cut spending on infrastructure, probably on education, possibly on the health system. But the most controversial cuts that he may be looking at are in provision for pensioners. Now, bear in mind that pensioners make a disproportionate percentage of the electorate which votes Conservative. So that's going to be politically very difficult to sell for the Conservative Party. But anyway, that's highly likely that he's going to do that. In fact, it's difficult to see how you can avoid doing that. But what taxes is he going to raise? Well, he's going to impose windfall taxes on the oil companies. Biden is doing the same, or talking about doing the same. Maybe that's not so surprising. Maybe that's not so controversial. But it's a one-off, shot in the arm. It's not going to make any big fundamental difference over the long term. I don't think he can raise VAT because that would add to inflation. I don't think he can seriously increase income tax. I think were he to do that, again, there would be massive opposition within the Conservative Party, and at a time when people are already under severe economic pressure, I think, increasing taxes is going to be so unpopular if it's done through income tax that I think it would be electoral suicide for the Conservatives to do that. So the only thing he can realistically do is increase corporate taxes, tax on businesses, which is already amongst the highest in Europe. I think only Germany is higher. And at the same time, we're going to see more taxes on property. So he's going to reduce support to local authorities, and local authorities in Britain, which carry out a large part of the British social services system, they're going to increase property taxes significantly. And last but not least, it's likely that he's going to increase capital gains taxes. Taxes on capital gains, on people, making income from businesses, selling goods and whatever. They may find that they have to give a proportion of what they make that way, again, to the British Treasury. So lots of taxes of that sort coming over the horizon.
Labour, Keir Starmer, the people of Britain, how do all of these forces react to this?
Well, Keir Starmer is nowhere to be seen. His great opportunity to make a big breakthrough. He's become the invisible man of British politics, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think anybody pays much attention to him. Labour is well ahead in the opinion polls, but this is pure inertia. I don't think anybody really expects Keir Starmer to break through and, establish a sort of political dominance in the way that, say, Tony Blair or beforehand Margaret Thatcher once did. So the British people, how do they react? At the moment, I think they're in a state of shock. I think that they're astonished at the way in which this whole thing has swept on them. But I've also said this, and I said this before, I've never known such a widespread feeling of anger amongst people in Britain. You can start to see it reflected in some of the newspapers. The Daily Mail is always a good one to look at because it's fairly close to the pulse, as close to the pulse of British opinion as you're ever likely to get from a newspaper here. But I personally think that eventually we'll start to see more strikes, more protests. But, given that the realities of the economic situation, it's difficult to see what these will do. I mean, you can strike, as the railway workers were threatening to do a few days ago. But ultimately, how does that help you? Any increase in wages that you extract that way is going to be eaten up by inflation very fast. And inflation in Britain is much higher than, of course, government figures say. And when the price caps on household bills are lifted in April, inflation will be even higher.
Is the Sunak government, are they still or actually let me rephrase that. Is the Sunak government trying to frame the cause of this crisis in much the same way that Johnson and Truss were framing it, i.e., this is because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. This is Putin's fault. Are they framing it that way, or are they at least being more straight up with the people and kind of saying, we screwed up? Or are they still trying to say this is all Putin's fault? And are the people buying it?
They are saying to some extent it's Putin's fault. They're also saying that it's Truss, Kwarteng's, and Johnson's fault. In fact, I mean, one of the most paradoxical things is that you could almost say that they're running against their own government's record, because I mean, Sunak is sort of trying to create the impression that, you know, he's coming in to clear the mess that all the others before him have made, except all the others before him have been conservatives. But you are starting to see some suggestions being made that, you know, it's not just Putin and it's not just, you know, Truss, Kwarteng, that there were underlying problems in Britain building up for a long time, that endless QE was not a good idea, that it's created more problems than it's solved, that relying overwhelmingly on services isn't a good idea either. But nobody is coming out openly and saying that the immediate crisis is being caused by Britain's support for the sanctions war. I haven't seen a single political figure of consequence or media article say that, or suggest that the way forward must be to try to reverse the sanctions war, to look for an end to the economic war of attrition. That remains still a taboo subject here.
All right. Anything else that we should know about the situation
Well, it's
in the
very
UK going
unstable.
forward?
It is extremely unstable. What Britain is waiting for is the new political force to appear on the scene. If it doesn't come, then we really will be in a situation of spiraling decline. I mean, this is
Political
what
force such as
well, a new political force that will challenge the established order, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party. People are talking about this, but there's no sign of where it's coming from. There's no sign of what it would be. There's no visible leader. Even Farage, I say even Farage, doesn't look particularly convincing, I have to say, at the moment. So without that, I think we probably are in a period of spiraling decline. That's certainly the sentiment, as you say, you know, in the media at the moment, that there's no real feeling of a way forward, because except downwards, and that the period of Britain being an important country in world affairs is now finally coming to an end. Perhaps just as well in that respect. Perhaps the illusion, the attempt to maintain the fiction that Britain mattered, to punch above its weight, has been maintained, sustained for too long, and has brought about the catastrophe that we're seeing.
sounds to me like people are looking for something along the lines of what Russia found at the end of the 90s.
Yeah. Yes, but you
Seems to be
see,
what.
well, maybe so, but I would suggest that perhaps we're at the beginning of the 90s, Russia's equivalent of the 90s, rather than at the end. I mean, you remember, it took years before the change eventually happened. I mean, Putin appeared in 1999, and I suggest that we're more closer to 1992 in our sequence than to 1999. So we have a long road to go before we get there. But, you know, maybe, I mean, ultimately something will happen, I presume. But at the moment, the political class looks exhausted and has no real idea of what to do.
The 90s were a rough decade for Russia. As bad
Yeah,
as it gets.
as bad as it gets. Well, we'll see how bad they get here.
Okay. TheDuran.locals.com, everybody. Look for us on Rockfin as well. And the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.